Water is the foundation of life. To survive, man had to design different ways of making water accessible. The city of San Juan was no exception. During the Spanish regime, the availability of water was one of the reasons for the fortification of the city of San Juan to protect its bay. Castillo San Felipe del Morro was built to protect the San Juan Bay. This deep bay was an excellent port, readily defended. Even though there was no source of water in the island's rain precipitation ensured clean water at all times. In 1587, engineers Juan de Tejada and Juan Bautista Antonelli designed the actual appearance of the fortress following well-established Spanish military fortification design principles. It took more than 250 years to complete its construction. This engineering wonder was conceived with its own water drainage and cistern, able to supply millions of gallons of water. Its complex 6-level designs made it possible to collect all the rainwater into its cistern. From the highest point of the fortress, water is collected and directed by drainages into the cisterns.
The highest point of water drainage and collection of the water is on the 6th level of Morro. On the 6th level and the 5th level used to drain into the historical water system, 3 of them that are under the main plaza of El Morro.
Each system has above the lower point area in the main plaza a well for people to access the water. This also guarantees access to water even in a dry season.
In historic times of the Spanish, the 4th level used to drain to the 3rd level and was collected in other types of water systems that are no longer available at this time.
El Morro has 3 cisterns capable of storing 500,000 gallons of rainwater, enough for a year's supply.
With that capacity, we could stay going for 6 months without having to get any more water into the system.
100 years after El Morro construction began, Spaniards decided to extend the city's wall for protection. For this reason, they started the construction of Castillos and Cristobal. This time, it was an Irish engineer, Thomas O'Daly, who was in charge of its design. Although El Morro and San Cristobal were designed by different engineers and there's 150 years lapse between constructions, the drainage and cisterns in both forts worked in similar ways, and people had access to the water through wells.
The similarities between the cisterns from San Felipe del Morro and San Cristobal are the water is collected through gravity from different levels, from upper levels up to the main plaza, which the cisterns are located underneath.
Besides that El Morro is smaller and San Cristobal is bigger, basically it's the same materials used in both water systems, but San Cristobal collects more rainwater.
Both cisterns had an overflow valve in case the cisterns were filled to their capacity. In 1898, after the Spanish-American War, when Spain ceded the island of Puerto Rico to the United States, the U.S. Army took control of the fortifications and changed the water recollection system that had worked for more than 300 years.
After the United States Army took control of the fortification, right after the conclusion of the Spanish-American War of 1898, a lot of changes occurred. It was a new way of thinking, new mindset, new technologies. In 1899, they installed plumbing and sewer systems in the fortifications. In 1901, then they proceeded to install electricity.
We need to think about the society in the beginning of the 20th century. San Juan didn't have rivers or lakes, didn't have water source with pipes to provide the homes of the people. So the cisterns of San Cristobal were considered by the U.S. Army to help the distribution to the city, not only to the garrison of the U.S. Army. Some of the changes they made here in San Cristobal includes a big windmill on the main plaza to pump the water out of the cisterns and to help to take the water to the city and San Juan and here to the garrison. The military events of the World War II and the Cold War, the cisterns in San Cristobal were considered part of the fortifications themselves as fallout shelters.
In 1961, the United States Army officially retired from El Morro, and both fortresses became part of the National Park Service to be preserved as museums. In 1983, El Morro was declared a World Heritage Site.
In 1960, when the Park Service was established here in San Juan, Puerto Rico, the preservation of the forts were not the number one priority. It was establishing the park itself. During the years, about 1970, 1980, other studies show that we should start moving to the more traditional type mortars and not the hard cement mortars that deteriorate the substrate of the fortifications.
Here at the park's laboratory, bricks are analyzed to determine which kind was used. This process involves a series of steps. First, the brick will be crushed by a machine. Then, using a microscope, it is closely inspected before the pieces are immersed in acid to remove the lime. All the pieces are sieved and weighted. It is important that the sand used matches the one used by Spaniards centuries ago. If a mortar that is incompatible is used, it won't work.
The water cistern project started as an idea from Mr. Edwin Colon, who then hired, the park hired an architectural and engineering firm that designed the plans that we used for the construction of the project. We designated some catchment areas in the Castillo where rainwater was going to be collected and then directed through the historical drainages into the cisterns. Then water was going to be pumped into the water treatment system where eventually it will go to non-potable uses like toilets and water closets.
As part of the preservation program of El Morro and San Cristobal, the National Park Service began gathering information and determining the needs to restore the cisterns. While inspecting and restoring the cisterns of El Morro and San Cristobal, it was observed that there were religious paintings at the top of the walls inside the cisterns. One of the paintings is an image of the crucifixion and includes the sun and the moon. It's interesting that the sun is facing the west and the moon the east. Probably, they are symbolic references of the Christian and Muslim worlds of the 16th century. The skull at the bottom of the cross represents death. The National Park Service has worked for a long time to restore El Morro and San Cristobal cisterns to make them functional by 2011.
Several years ago, when we were looking for ways to save money, we were looking ways to become more efficient as an operation, and also we were having a lot of interest in the cisterns as to how much water they held. We just sort of put everything together and started doing some early work into, hey, what would it really take to get these things back and going? We found out that we could do it. We talked to our regional office and found that we could get some funding, so we made the decision to go forward with it and start bringing them back again. We did some preliminary estimates and found that we could save anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000 to $25,000 a year on water costs.
So it would be a great addition of money that we can use to find or give some other appointments to people in jobs.
We have restored a lot of the plasters on the inner part of the water systems. We have constructed a new pump system.
We are approaching the timeline that we set to open up the cisterns.
Well, we're very confident that once we get the system up and running, that we will be able to save funding that we can use in other places. We also have a next step or a phase 2 to this, because right now The cisterns are only going to provide water to our bathrooms and things like that, but in the future phase, that they will provide us all the water that we need here at the fortifications.
This documentary was produced in 2011 to keep evidence of the water cisterns restoration of San Juan fortresses, Castillo San Felipe del Morro and Castillo San Cristobal.